So we have a number of wonderful Princeton speakers gathered here to reflect on our friend and colleague, Xiyue Wang, who has been unjustly imprisoned for more than 3 years for doing his academic work. But we could think of no better way to begin than with Hua Chu, Xiyue's wife and tireless advocate. Please welcome Hua.
I deeply appreciate everyone being here today with us to show your support to my husband, Xiyue Wang. And I would like to especially thank Mikey and others from the Free Xiyue Wang Working Group for their hard work to make this rally happen today, and your great advocacy for Xiyue, which has become an important support for us and to keep our spirits high no matter what happens in our life. Thank you so much. This August marked the 3rd anniversary of his unjust detention. I'm quite distressed by the reality that our lives have turned into an endless struggle in the constant swirl of geopolitical tensions. Iranian authorities has deliberately fabricated espionage allegations out of my husband's academic research and used him as a tool in their foreign policy. Actually, since Foreign Minister Zarif's recent interview with NPR News, when he was specifically asked about the status of my husband's case, Xiyue's name had appeared in the news every single day in the past week, either in Iran's demand for a global prisoner swap or in our State Department's remarks on their maximum pressure policy on Iran. It is typically confusing for me to either stay more optimistic about the situation because my husband's name eventually, after 3 years, draws more media attention, or I should be more cautious about any fake hope that could easily let me down again, like searching light in a black hole. I feel powerless after having bustled and hustled around for weeks, month, and now over 3 years. But I still cannot find any sign of any dialogue between Iran and the United States. And that would be the only way for a resolution of Xiyue's case and eventually bring him home again. By now, Xiyue has been in jail almost tripling the time the American diplomats were held hostage between 1979 and 1981. And he could be kept there until 2026 when his 10-year sentence ends. Today, I still remember clearly those fateful days at the beginning of all of this crisis. At 2:20 a.m., August 7, 2016, I was awakened by a midnight phone call from my husband in Tehran. 3 weeks earlier, police had confiscated his passport and laptop, and they questioned him several times, and eventually they told him, "You can leave the country, and we will escort you to the airport." He gave me a call and told me that he will purchase a ticket home, and he will call me back when he arrived at the airport. Anxiously waiting for hours, I sent him a text message that went unanswered. After many days, I finally learned that he was being held in Evin Prison, the notorious Evin Prison. 8 months later, in April 2017, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for alleged acts of espionage. Our son Shaofan was barely 3 years old when his father was arrested, and now he is 6.5. Though Xiyue is the one sitting in Evin, our entire family bears the toll, and our son takes the hardest. Our lives upended as a result of decades-long hostility between Iran and the United States. Like many families here in this land of immigrants, mine transcends national boundaries. My husband was born in Beijing, China, and became a U.S. citizen after coming to the United States to study first at the University of Washington in Seattle, in South Asian Studies, and later at Harvard for a master's degree in Russia and Central Asian Studies. We met in Hong Kong, and our son was born in Beijing. Our son Shaofan is a Chinese-American dual national, and I'm Chinese national. Xiyue traveled in Tehran in 2016 as a part of his dissertation research on the Central Asian nomadic groups in the late 19th century and the early 20th centuries. When modern states began to form atop a fluid set of identities, boundaries, and economies. This was a very ambitious project that grew out of his long-standing respect for Islam and his love for Persian culture. Although Xiyue had reservations about traveling to Iran at the beginning, he was advised by his advisors from Princeton University and also other academic institutions that since the United States, Iran, and other nations had signed the Iran nuclear deal, times are changing, so he should be fine. During the months studying at the archives and the libraries in Tehran, Xiyue began to uncover a remarkable story. At a time when many states were doing their utmost to exterminate indigenous communities, Iran had developed a uniquely flexible system to integrate its very diverse populations. Contrary to a conventional narrative of Iran as eternally backward and authoritarian, Xiyue had discovered a moment of extraordinary political creativity and pluralism. The plight to Xiyue occurred before his planned return to Princeton. After he was summoned for interrogations, he emailed his professors for help. At the time, the State Department and the university believed that nothing worse would happen to him because he's just a student and did nothing wrong. Even after his sudden disappearance for a year, throughout the close trial to sentencing, people still believe that Xiyue could be quietly released at any time with the conclusion of his legal case. Xiyue's research, which had been approved by Iran's foreign ministry, required him to sift through mundane manuscripts that are a century old. The documents had nothing to do with any contemporary politics, and were certainly not confidential. They were pre-scanned and compiled in a catalog and uploaded to their digital system that is available for readers to review. Yet, the Iranian authorities used his research as a pretext for a case against him, ostensibly to put pressure on the United States government. Archival research is an essential part of Xiyue's career as a historian. Only by immersing himself in the primary sources of history, he can write and speak with authority. Xiyue decided to focus his dissertation research on Central Asia, which was once the nexus of the Silk Road, but its late imperial period was less studied. Xiyue applied his insatiable drive to know something in a very meaningful way that wasn't known before. It is devastating for him to have left his family for 4 years already to pursue this dream. Xiyue is a diligent and passionate scholar. Even now, when books he can get hold of them, is one of his few moments amid harsh prison conditions. Sitting in the middle level of a 3-tiered bunk bed, crammed in a small underground cell with more than 25 cellmates. He cannot even straighten his back. But when he's able to have books in his hands, he's able to put out of his mind the noises and the smells from that cramped underground cell and imagine that he's coming back to his beloved Firestone Library. When we can sometimes speak, Xiyue brings up memories of our son Shaofan, including the sunny sounds he made as a baby and the beautiful afternoons when he rode on Xiyue's shoulders on the way back from Yunnan. Shaofan, however, was too young to remember those moments. He is quickly growing up into a boy who is curious about the world, but find confusing about his place in it. We recently moved to a new apartment at Lakeside, the graduate student housing. In our first night there, Shaofan suddenly asked me, "Would Dad still find us since we have moved?" As a single mom in a 24/7 day-to-day crisis, I'm juggling many balls and experiencing huge anxiety hour after hour that I may drop any one of them, in the Xiyue's case, my job, and the responsibilities to keep the house running. I'm saddened by my son's remark and worried that all of my efforts would be meaningless if I were to fail my son. My husband and our family have become innocent victims in an apparently ever-intensifying quarrel between world powers. He is an academic researcher, a father and a husband. He's not a political figure nor a spy. It is fundamentally unjust that he continues to be treated as a hostage and a bargaining chip in this geopolitical dispute. We all know that anything is possible. It just requires the will. In July this past summer, President Trump's intervention in the superstar rapper A$AP Rocky's case at the time that he was involved in a street assault case under review by a Swedish court. After the president's intervention, the rapper star got released in no time. I believe that my husband deserved the same level of attention. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention forcefully stated that the spying charges against my husband are false and the conviction and the imprisonment were unjust. Xiyue was persecuted for his scholarship and criminalized for his American citizenship. Will his country, the United States of America, stand up for him? I hope the answer is a resounding yes. The voices of scholars are united in their support of Xiyue and the intellectual values that he embodies. However, scholars alone cannot secure his release. They desperately need the support of everyone who still believes that learning and cultural exchange still have a place in our world today. They should not have to fight and stand alone in this just fight against the persecution of scholars. Working with others around the world, the United States government must help defend the values that attract so many of the world's brightest minds to its shores. Securing the release of Xiyue would improve a commitment to the freedom of thought, international scholarship, and the cultural understanding that he represents. I implore Iran, the United States, and my home country, China, and all the members in the international community to come together to find a way to free this innocent man, Xiyue Wang, and bring him home to his family without delay. He has already been unfairly kept away from us for way too long. At the community university fair in May, my friends from the working group set up a table to raise awareness of the plight of my husband. Xiaofan, with his preschool friends, applied stickers bearing his father's image on it onto water bottles and give away these bottles to people passing by. And when people stopped by to hear our story, Xiaofan chimed in loudly. He said, "And my dad is not a bad guy." Like all children in this world, Xiaofan needs his father, and I plead for the gate of mercy to be opened for my husband's liberty. I feel very grateful for the support for so many friends and families in Princeton, and especially Princeton University and Xiyue's professors and academics across disciplines. I continue to pray that when Xiaofan blows out his birthday candles next year, Xiyue will be right there with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wa. There are many people in the back right now, and I would encourage people who are sitting up front to maybe scooch forward so that people can then kind of fill in. I want to make sure that everybody is able to see. So as Hua's pointed out, it's not always clear to people why Xiyue would have been in such a difficult situation to do his historical research. And a number of our speakers here this evening have some light to shed on both the perils and significance of global, engaged, free scholarship, and on the importance of protecting and supporting such scholarship. So leading us off then is Molly Green, Professor Green is a professor of history and Hellenic studies and the director of the program in Hellenic studies, who taught Xiyue in Ottoman history. So please welcome Molly Green.
Well, we are a profession of words, but I must say words seem rather feeble after what we've just heard, but I'll do my best. Recently, my friend and colleague in the history department, Tony Grafton, reminded me of his teacher Arnaldo Momigliano's rule: a great man with good handwriting is twice a great man. In a humorous way, he was getting at a very serious issue, which is that reading historical sources is difficult. To read sources before the advent of print is to wrestle with handwriting. Let's add on to that reading handwriting in a language that is not your own, which means, of course, that even before you get to your sources, you've spent years studying the language. And let's pile on top of that traveling to faraway places where the archives might be very difficult to access, whether for reasons of politics, of disorganization, which can often be explained as the result of working in a country that is not wealthy. Maintaining good archives is not going to be at the top of their list of priorities, or simply bureaucratic power plays. Long ago, a good friend of mine had to waste 3 months out of a 12-month Fulbright sitting in the waiting room of the Topkapı Palace in Istanbul because the head librarian didn't like her. Finally, the librarian realized that my friend wasn't going to give up, and rather than having to look at her sitting in the waiting room every day, she let her into the archive. These are all the challenges that Xiyue took on: to learn Persian, to struggle with the complexities of 19th century bureaucratic documents, and to do it far from home, in a country whose rules were very hard to understand. I too study that part of the world. I am an historian of the Ottoman Empire, and as Mikey said, I taught Xiyue in a graduate class on Ottoman history. And thus I think I can say that I'm cognizant of the courage that Xiyue demonstrated by embarking on his project. Such courageous and ambitious scholars need to be supported for many reasons, but let me just underline one today. When it comes to the Middle East, more than one U.S. official has spoken of the region as a wasteland of sand. Implicit in these indictments and these ugly words is an assertion that these are places without history, or that the only thing worth knowing about them is what outside, often hostile powers have to say about them in sources written in English, easily accessible on the internet. Xiyue's work then is not only about 19th century Iran, it is about excavating the voices of people who are still far too hard to hear. We must also remember that Xiyue's situation, his unjust imprisonment, is at the extreme end of a problem that is a growing threat to scholarship across the world, which is freedom of movement. You may know that this summer the president of Harvard wrote a letter to Secretary of State Pompeo expressing his concern, his alarm actually, that more and more foreign students are being denied access to U.S. universities because of increasingly lengthy visa procedures and even outright denial of visas. As someone who knows many scholars from the Muslim world, it seems that every time I'm at a conference, whether here or in Europe, there's someone missing because they were denied a visa to travel to that conference. By definition, scholarship is international and is thus particularly vulnerable to the increasing difficulty of crossing borders. We who are gathered here on this lovely campus are, of course, not suffering as Xiyue is suffering. But his problem is our problem, and Princeton's problem, too. It is also Princeton's opportunity. Rightly or wrongly, it is a fact that when something happens to a student at an Ivy League school, the story gets more attention than when students at other schools run into difficulty. Witness what happened just at the end of this summer when a Palestinian freshman admitted to Harvard was denied entry to the country when he landed at Logan Airport in Boston. The story was on the front cover of the New York Times, and Harvard, with support from other organizations as well, was able to get that decision reversed. 2 weeks later, the student was back in Boston, and he matriculated with his class. It is a happy ending at a time when there are so few. But a commentator on the story noted that this is a situation that is happening every day to students across the country. Similarly, when Princeton speaks about Xiyue's case, people will listen because it is Princeton. This makes it even more incumbent upon Princeton and all of us who enjoy the privileges of this university here to defend academic freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Green. So up next, we have Will Witham, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of History and a friend of Xiyue's who shares his doctoral advisor.
Dear friends and supporters of Xiyue Wang, dear Hua and Shaofan, thank you for this invitation to speak. This is a special but entirely undeserved honor. I feel that there is little I can say that the other people on this stage cannot say much more eloquently. But what I can say is the following. I am a G5 in history, and over the past 9 months, it's been my privilege to speak with Xiyue over the telephone from time to time. What Xiyue has endured, as we all know, is not only criminal, it is also incapacitating. As Xiyue has explained to us, prison poisons the mind and dulls the imagination. In prison, a curious person may become indifferent, a passionate person may become apathetic. Prison may also amplify the worst impulses within us. An irritable person may become a bully, and a bully may become a tormentor. After 3 long years, we might expect a lesser person to have regressed or declined. But has Xiyue done so? He is not. Xiyue Wang is not a lesser person. Xiyue Wang perseveres and perseveres and perseveres each day. Xiyue has made each moment a monument to his existence and to the value of scholarly freedom that he so prizes. The Iranian regime has not stopped him reading and thinking about the cultures, societies, and history of Central Asia. It has not stopped him practicing his French, which I think must be the 15th language that he knows. It has not stopped him writing his nonfiction stories, which are full of precise descriptions and dry observations. It has not stopped him questioning, criticizing, or making jokes. The Iranian regime has not stopped him laughing. It has not stopped him being the most acute and uncannily intelligent interlocutor that I have had in 4 years at Princeton. And above all, the Iranian regime has not stopped Xiyue from being encouraging and charitable towards others. So if imprisonment has brought Xiyue down, I still feel that he towers over me. As much as this situation is a tragedy, and for all the indignities and the suffering that he and his family must endure every day, what Xiyue manages to do each day is nevertheless an inspiration to me. It is a testament to the strength of his commitments and to the supreme value of freedom. This year, in between some of my talks on the telephone with Xiyue, I read The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I know it is a story that means a great deal to Hua. It is about a kind and intelligent young man who, with his whole life in front of him, is betrayed. The woman he loves is taken from him, and he survives cruel years in prison. For a time, he almost loses his will to live. But Edmond Dantes endures. He is sustained by his faith in justice, by his will to learn, and by a friend with whom he discusses history, philosophy, science, and more. Doesn't this sound familiar to you? It certainly did to me. Xiyue Wang is to me Edmond Dantes. He is Princeton's Edmond Dantes. He is as determined and talented. He has as much to live and to fight for. His struggle for freedom is as powerful and as inspiring. And I know that he, too, will be vindicated. At the conclusion of the novel, Dantes, now at liberty, writes to a friend. There is neither happiness nor misery in the world, he writes. There is only the comparison of one state with another, nothing more. He who has felt the deepest grief is best able to experience supreme happiness. We must have felt what it is to die, that we may appreciate the enjoyments of living. Never forget that until the day when God shall deign to reveal the future to man, all human wisdom is summed up in these 2 words, wait and hope. Wait and hope. Wait and hope. This is the message that I try to convey to Xiyue each time we speak on the telephone, and it's what I try to remember each day of his imprisonment. But there is still much more that we can do, each of us, every day. Let us together pledge, for as long as it takes, to speak with and comfort Xiyue and his family. Let us draw attention to his detention. Let us agitate for his immediate release. Above all, let us not be troubled or dispirited. Let us rather be inspired by Xiyue's example, by his love for his family and friends, by his kindness, by his courage, and by his tenacious defense of the values we hold dear. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Next, we are fortunate to hear from Stanley Katz, Professor of Public and International Affairs and President Emeritus of the American Council of Learned Societies.
Thanks. Thanks very much. After what we've just heard, I don't think I have a great deal to add. I don't know Xiyue. I really regret that. I have a deep feeling, however, for him as a scholar and as a human being, and I share with everybody in this room a feeling of outrage that he has been put in the position that he is now in. It's not entirely unfamiliar to me. I had a graduate student here, I can't tell you when, but about 30 years ago, who was studying actually Soviet policy in Russia, and went to Russia with a Russian student to work in their archives. And as a few people here may remember, he and the Russian were imprisoned. The Russian was convicted of espionage. My student was charged with espionage. But fortunately, in that case, he was imprisoned for a couple of months, and there were negotiations between the two countries, and he was released. He's now quite happily a member of the State Department. And some of you may also know my friend Haile Esfandiari, who was the head of Middle Eastern Studies at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington. She had lived here with her husband for some time. Before this, she was born in Iran. She went back to visit her mother, still living in Tehran, and she was imprisoned in exactly the same prison. And she was kept in prison for nearly 6 months. Finally, as a result of negotiations between the two countries, she was released. Now, that's what should happen in this case, but of course it hasn't yet happened in this case. I was asked to speak about international law, and I'll do that very briefly, because unfortunately international law isn't going to solve this situation. To give you an example of that, in August of this year, Foreign Minister Zarif was speaking to the Chinese foreign minister in Beijing, and he made a statement on that point saying that the problem between the two countries was the rejection of international law, not just lack of respect for international law, but in fact contempt for international law. He said it's on the rise and we must work together against it. Well, if that was a real value rather than a meaningless statement, Xiyue wouldn't be where he is right now. And unfortunately, his situation is not, it's hardly unique. There was an article in the International Higher Education newspaper this morning about scholars who are currently being detained in foreign countries. It listed 10 scholars being currently imprisoned. Of the 10 scholars, 8 are imprisoned in Iran. So this is a bad actor country, and a country which isn't responding to international law or international pressure. And that's really important because Iran has in fact signed all of the relevant international agreements. Iran is a signatory to the Geneva Conventions. It's a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a signatory to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's a signatory to the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. These are the backbone of the international human rights scheme, and Iran formally is party to all of them. Unfortunately, the United States has not signed all of these documents, and I think that's part of the problem, that we have been deficient in our own sense of responsibility to the international regime. And one of the things we ought to work for, frankly, is to advocate that our own government join the international community in supporting these norms. But of course, that's not the real problem here. There is no doubt legally that Xiyue is illegally detained. It is a violation of international law in a number of different respects. It is a violation, I think, of Iranian law as well as international law. The solutions obviously are political, not legal in this case, but I think it's terribly important that we stand up and defend Xiyue's rights as a scholar, and that we say that free and unfettered scholarship is actually a key to the establishment and defense of liberty around the world. Without knowing, we cannot be free. So Xiyue at the moment is sacrificing for all of us, and what we owe him is sturdy advocacy for his quick release. I extend my sympathy to Hua, to their son, to the family, but it is the responsibility of this community to advocate for his release.
Thank you, Professor Katz. So we'd now like to invite up Anthony Grafton, the Henry Putnam University Professor of History, a historian of scholarship in early modern Europe, and the former president of the American Historical Association. Doing my sound guy duty.
That looks good. So thank you all for being here. I apologize that the annual fall gun seems to have me in its role, but I'll try to speak clearly. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to Mikey and the other organizers for inviting me to speak in support of this brilliant, learned, humane scholar who has been arrested for doing his job. History is made in archives. No documents, no history, says one of the great guides to modern history written in 1898. Historians are made in archives too. That's where, if we have the normal experience of historians, we learn the few but intense pleasures of historical research, being assigned a seat by the window, for example, or opening a ledger or a box, or unrolling a scroll, or opening a manuscript and seeing the signature or the writing of somebody who we are passionately interested in. And then there's the rush of joy when you realize you found something that all of your close friends who are interested in exactly the same things you are have missed. And of course, there are the normal sorrows, fighting your way through afternoons of jet lag, finding that the 3 documents you're allowed in one day have nothing to tell you and it's 10 in the morning, and above all, finding that your friends have scooped you. We do all this because when it works, we find out a past that no one has found before, and the best of us, like Xiyue, find pasts that have a deep meaning, pasts that have something to say to the present, something even to say about a better future. And it was these humble things that Xiyue wanted to be engaged in when he was arrested, tried, and condemned on these false charges of espionage. It's been heartbreaking to witness this story with all of the others who were concerned, though it has also been heartening to see the extraordinary support that his cohort of students have given, the love and the support that they've given to him and his family over these 3 years. Somehow we don't think of graduate school as a loving and supportive environment, at least we don't always, but it has been in this case. So let me try to imitate Xiyue, as historians should when we see a great historian at work, and look for a slightly better past. Archival history has its ironies that aren't much known in public. History and archives were not invented in the modern world. They were invented in antiquity, Chinese antiquity, other antiquities, and notably in the ancient Achaemenid Empire of Persia, founded by Cyrus in the 6th century BCE. Archives mattered to the rulers of ancient Persia. The book of Esther tells us that King Ahasuerus, that's Xerxes probably to most of you, couldn't sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. The biblical book of Ezra describes the rebuilding of the Temple of the Jews in Jerusalem. Local officials, Persian officials, questioned the right of the Jews to go about building their temple again. And the Jews insisted that Cyrus had not only allowed them to return to Israel, but had given them permission to build his temple. They appealed to the current Persian king, Darius, asking that a search be made in the king's treasure house, whether a decree of Cyrus the king to build the house of God in Jerusalem was made. The king inquired in the House of the Rolls, and the archivists found an official document, not a public proclamation, but a memorandum from the official government in Aramaic, the language of government business in the ancient Near East. That's in the book of Ezra too, an archival document provided by Persia to subjects who were not Persians to guarantee their rights. Building continued, and this document and others are preserved thanks to a Persian government. So ancient Persia kept archives and made their contents available when justice required. More important, ancient Persian historians seem to have used archival documents. They may have been the first historians who did so in the wider Mediterranean world. The first Greek historians we have, Herodotus and Thucydides, quote documents, and most of the documents they quote come from Persia, like the one Herodotus quotes, which lets him tell you about the whole Persian postal system, stage by stage, and how many days it takes to go from one to the other. Exactly the kind of harmless but fascinating information that a historian like Xiyue still looks for. We don't have Persia's imperial chronicles. But it seems pretty certain, since Greeks and Jews were very far apart culturally, and both of them were writing history with documents, and both of them were living in little spits on the edge of the great Persian Empire, the ancient Mediterranean world's great example of beneficent imperial governance, that it was the Persians who actually invented archival history in the part of the world that our traditions come from. The Chinese were doing it too, but that's another story. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the Islamic Republic of Iran looked back to the ways of the ancient Persian Empire and saw in it, as they should, the best of all reasons why they should let this wonderful historian go? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Grafton. We're now thrilled to hear some words from the poet, Tracy K. Smith, the chair of the Lewis Center for the Arts, the Roger S. Berlin 52 Professor of the Humanities, and Professor of Creative Writing.
Good afternoon. I am grateful for this opportunity to stand in solidarity with Hua and others, and to add my voice to the call for freedom for Xiyue, a scholar, a neighbor, and a parent in my community. I'm a poet because throughout my life, the voices and perspectives of others from other places, backgrounds, and time periods have offered me meaning, courage, and certainty. Poetry has taught me that it is only by narrowing the distance between myself and others that I can feel whole and at home in the world. That's a choice that all of us who are members of this scholarly community have made, and it's one we must protect and defend. I'd like to speak to that through poetry, but I want to tell you a little bit about a relationship that I've had with another poet over the last number of years. In 2013, I met a Chinese poet named Ile in New York City. A mutual friend had put us in touch with one another, though Ile spoke little English and I speak no Chinese. With the help of a bilingual intermediary, we shared a long lunch and made the first strides toward friendship and collaboration. From the moment I encountered her poems, even in rudimentary translation, I felt a powerful sense of connection to Ile's use of images, her passion, her devotion to the earth, and her belief in the cosmic dimension of our existence. In her work, Ile is a defender of personal freedom and a critic of authoritarianism. She was one of the first contemporary Chinese poets to openly explore questions of female sexuality and sexual agency. Over these last several years, both at home in Princeton as well as on visits to Beijing, I've worked with Ile and our collaborator, whose name is Chang Tai-bi, to render these marvelous poems into living English. In the process, Ile has enlarged my sense of language. She's gotten inside my own voice and my heart in ways that I'm deeply grateful for. Ile passed away last year. Her selected poems, My Name Will Grow Wide Like a Tree, will be published in the US in a couple of years, and I wanted to share a few of the English versions that emerged from that collaboration in the spirit of free exchange and also the struggle for justice. This poem is called Green Trees Greet the Rainstorm. I belong to the nation of wild arms flailing in the wind. And I know you are bound to have at me, but how can I resist lifting my head to look you in the eye? How can I not greet you, though my gown will soon be battered to shreds? Better this lashing, flesh burst open, ransacked by air, than to live ambushed by loneliness. I belong to the nation of startled cries, voices caged in wind, and I know you are bound to unravel me. But how can I not lift my head and look you in the eye? How can I not greet you, though my living gown will soon be shredded, shed? Better to be ravaged straight away in youth than to live out another year's quiet undoing. The nude. My eye laps at you in lamplight like a white-hot tongue. Longing draws back, then rises, tidal. The curtain of my hair announces my breasts. Your lips, a languid breeze. Like a miracle, we feast, and nothing is spent. Let flesh attend to flesh, sex to sex. Oh, dexterous gold watch of the universe, on which 1 minute can straddle 100 years. I'll close with this poem, which is called Nature Aria. Autumn wind chases in from all directions, and 1,000 chaste leaves give way. Scatter in me the seeds of 1,000 saplings. Let grow a grassy heaven on my brow, a sun. This bliss is yours, living world, and alone it endures. Music at midnight, young wine, lovers hand in hand by daylight, moonlight. Living world, hold me in your mouth. Slip on your frivolous shoes and dance with me. My soul is the wild vine who alone has grasped it, who alone has seen through the awful plot, who will arrive in time to vanquish the river already heavy with blossoms, the moon spilling light onto packs of men. What is sadder than witless wolves, wind without borders, nationless birds, small gifts laden with love's intentions. Fistfuls of rain fall hard, fill my heart with mud. An old wind may still come chasing in, resurrection fire, and me here laughing like a cloud in trousers, entreating the earth to bury me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Smith. So our last speaker for this evening, which may come as a surprise, is Xiyue Wang himself. He composed a short piece about his time in Evin Prison, which he was able to share in limited communication with Hua, friends and family in the US. This text will be read by Casey Eilbert and Hannah Stamler. Following the conclusion of the reading, we will observe a moment of silence. And I'll ask at this time if you have your little candles to light them up. And yes, thank you very much.
Debout les damnés de la terre, debout les forçats de la faim. La raison tonne en son cratère, c'est l'éruption de la faim. Du passé, faisons table rase, pour l'esclave debout, debout. These are the first lines of the revolutionary anthem, L'Internationale, or the International. It calls on the people to rise up against oppression and tyranny. I hardly even knew these few lines of the French original accurately, but I have known the song since I was a schoolboy. It is like an old acquaintance. Perhaps there is no better song that resonates with the unjust, oppressive nature of my incarceration. This song's simple melody and powerful lyrics are most uplifting for me in such a depressing situation. At the beginning of my arrest, as I awaited trial, I was held in Section 209 of Evin Prison in Tehran. Every week, we prisoners were taken from our windowless cell to a section of the rooftop yard for hava huri, or, quote, eating air, as they say in Persian. At this time, I would walk fast around the high walls of the yard, singing the lyrics of the International in French and Chinese, and humming the rest of its melody, letting the sound carry me away. The International was composed shortly after the Paris Commune in 1871 and sung by the revolutionaries on the left. When the Bolsheviks gained power in Russia, the song was adopted as the national anthem for Soviet Russia and persisted through the early years of the USSR. There is perhaps no other song that has made greater impact throughout human history than the International. In China, growing up in the 80s and 90s, I belonged to the last generation familiar with this song. I remember learning the Chinese version in school as part of my political education. Then, my uncle taught me how to sing it in French. During the Cultural Revolution of the 60s and 70s, when anything foreign was considered corrupting, my uncle's middle school taught students French haphazardly. While today my uncle remembers no more French than bonjour or au revoir, he kept as a souvenir from those years a French textbook prepared by his teacher in black ink on yellowing graph paper. It felt like a piece of history that had its own story to tell. Its front cover was missing a corner bent and creased. The lyrics of the International were printed on the last 2 pages. My uncle could still sing the International well and would ask me to follow him in tune. I felt thrilled, as if I were going back into history. This way, I inherited a few lines of the song from him in French. In the mid-90s, a Chinese rock and roll band adopted the International, giving it new significance, symbolically connecting the old era to a new one. My friends and I used to play the Rock International after school at maximum volume on the stereo newly equipped by the school. We would sing along in unison, and the effect was electrifying, all of us striving together for a promising future. I was not committed to the communist revolutionary ideal, but I could understand the power of the song nonetheless.
In Section 209, before it was time for hava huri, the prisoners would swarm to the door, each of us putting on a pair of slippers and a blindfold, leaving just enough space below the eyes to see our footsteps. We stood facing the corridor wall until everyone came out of the cell. Guards took us out, one level up through the stairs. As the door to the rooftop clanked open, we were led into the yard one after another. Immediately, I would snatch off my blindfold and crumble it into my pocket. For a few seconds, I had to squint into the bright sunlight. Relaxing my eyes, the yard came into view. It is square in shape, half the size of a backyard swimming pool. There is a steel structure atop the walls covered by steel mesh. At the center of the mesh is an opening through which one can see the sky. 2 surveillance cameras are installed in opposite corners. Beyond the wall, on one side, is the facade of an office building. Its windows are forever closed. Nobody has ever seen through them. On the opposite side, I could see the pleasant green treetops afar. If I stood on my toes, they would further slip away. Leaning against the wall, the most prominent thing that can be seen is a very large, imposing national flag of Iran, flying in the breeze in the far end of the Evin prison compound 100 meters away. The yard reminded me of when I was working as an interpreter in the International Red Cross in Afghanistan. Due to the volatile security situation, we expats were combined in our compound, surrounded by high walls and forbidden from going out of the compound for non-work purposes. We all complained that we were living and working in a virtual prison. Visiting real prisons to protect prisoners' rights was a major part of my job. I was often horrified by the conditions of the Afghan prisoners. I knew that many people spent a long time in the Afghan prisons, not because they'd done any crime, but simply because they were suspected to be members or sympathizers of the armed opposition groups like the Taliban. Some prisoners were locked up for years and not able to phone their families. They were left completely alone, languishing in jail without any resources, suffering from malnutrition, as well as abuse from authorities and fellow inmates. I wished I would never be back in jail like these poor Afghan prisoners. But in an ironic twist of fate, I now find myself languishing in prison as if forsaken by God. And just like those poor Afghan prisoners, I don't know what I'm in for. This time, it is my human rights that are being abused and in need of protection.
I love this country. Greater Iran in a cultural sense, or the Persian cultural sphere, was the geographical center of the Eurasian continent, that is, the known Old World, linking Oriental and Occidental civilizations. I had long been inspired to learn Persian and to study this part of the world, to unveil its historical mysteries. Indeed, I learned Persian well and came to Iran to do research with sincere goodwill. I obtained permission and arrived just after the Iran deal was signed, what was meant to be the beginning of a new relationship between Iran and the United States. Yet, I was arrested, forced into confession, unjustly convicted, and imprisoned as a spy. In her many efforts to rescue me and not offend the powers that be, my wife describes what has happened to me as a, quote, terrible misunderstanding. My situation is in fact anything but a misunderstanding. I'm incarcerated here because, and only because, I came to this country on a navy blue passport with a bald eagle emblem. For the Iranian authorities, I don't matter in my story. I have no agency. My nationality is what counts, and I feel disillusioned, betrayed, and angry. Surely this is what many communist revolutionaries felt in the closing decades of the 20th century. They believed in the promise of communism, but saw that it brought endless suffering for hundreds of millions across the world. This is what the International, too, ended up embodying, a beautiful ideal turned into a terrible disillusionment. Even still, the tune lingers in my head.
"2 years since I have seen the rooftop yard of Section 209, I am still incarcerated in Evin Prison. The only difference is that I was transferred and have spent most of the last 2 years in the general prison. It has been easier, and I've been able to establish a simple routine of daily activities: calling, studying, cooking, exercising, napping, more studying. What has changed a little, now compared to then, is the difficulty for me to grapple with the sheer day-to-day reality of living in prison, being deprived of everything I long for in life. A convicted criminal in name, but a hostage in fact. Gradually, I have learned to adapt and compartmentalize things. To keep the unpleasant at bay, I focus on songs like The International that evoke an ambivalent yet intense feeling. Lately, I have started picking up my French again, just to make the prison life a bit more productive. One day, on one of my limited phone calls with a French-speaking friend, I asked her to indulge me by singing a French pop song. She was happy to oblige, but told me she couldn't remember the lyrics of pop songs and offered to sing me something else instead. She began singing The International in French. I was in shock. shocked that this song came to the mind of a young French-speaking American woman, and shocked by my reaction. Listening to her sing the song was like rewinding and playing back everything I felt when singing it in section 209. The nostalgia, the disillusionment, and the indignation. Also, the hopes dashed and since gained during the last 3 years in prison. In Persian, the expression for to feel nostalgic and sad, or to meet someone or something, is dil tang shadani, or literally, for one's heart to feel tightened. As she sang the International, my heart was tightened.